take up too much of his time. So Ron, take it away, man. Thank you for agreeing to speak.
All right. Thank you, Sam. Thanks for asking me to speak. And Tom, thanks for giving Sam my name. My name is Ron Dobin. I'm an alcoholic, and I learned to follow the rules in Alcoholics Anonymous. I just want to make sure I got it right, Sam. This is an hour and a half meeting. I'm supposed to talk somewhere between a half hour and an hour and then open it up. Is that?
Yep.
Okay. Good.
Perfect.
I like the reading on emotional sobriety. I talk a lot about emotional sobriety because I think it's something that's real important in AA. It's funny how sometimes God does things for us. I knew I was supposed to do this today, and I do a lot of prayer and meditation in the morning. And one of the things I do, I get these daily pondables every day, and I read through them, and that's just part of my start in the morning. And the one I got this morning was sent in by a guy from Gainesville, Florida. One of the readings, there's about 10 of them, including daily reflections and one day at a time, et cetera. This came from a book called Food for Thought. And as I said, it was sent by a guy from Gainesville, Florida, named Ted. And he says, Ted said, either you go for emotional sobriety or risk a miserable, often lengthy death by alcoholism. My crew calls it big and rich sobriety. We buried him yesterday. The county coroner had published the required notices for the next of kin, and nobody had claimed the body. It was just myself and his sponsor, no preacher even. The county doesn't even pay for these. Not much of a send-off, and not the one David had asked for. A cheap coffin, backhoe dug a hole, and that was it. Another old AA gone. He had been sober over 20 years, and in AA over 30. A stern, rigid man who tried to soften his edges and never could. He was a loner, a fringer, an isolated man at the edge of life's good things. He hung in there, and in the end, he hung himself. I don't know why. He was ill. He had the beginnings of dementia and cancer. But I've seen AAs deal with such things before. I don't know why David decided he couldn't. It isn't the first time I've been through this in Alcoholics Anonymous. And any of us, actually, I've been sober over 44 years. I've seen a lot of people who have gone back out. I've seen a lot of people who have killed themselves, just like what this guy is talking about. It isn't the first time I've been through this in Alcoholics Anonymous. I've known several over the years.
Hey, Ron, you muted yourself. Unmute yourself. You just muted yourself.
You missed the best part of my talk.
I know, man. You're muted. Sorry.
Anyway, I don't know where I wound up muting myself, but it says, I've known several over the years who just gave up and walked out of life's door one day, sober but not happy, but sober but not at peace, sober but they died of alcoholism. Our disease doesn't need us to drink in order to kill us. I wish more folks knew that and appreciated it. Now, I didn't know any of that when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I thought that alcoholism was a drinking problem. My problem looked like a drinking problem. I came here, I was 28 years old. I was at my, I don't know, second, third, fourth meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was a speaker meeting. The speaker made a statement, and that statement was for anyone that was alcoholic that was sitting in this room, man or woman. He said it made no difference. There were only three things that could ever happen to any of us. One was we would die from the disease of alcoholism. Then he used a term I had never heard before. He called it a related disorder, like a drunk driving accident. He said, two is we would be locked up in jail or a mental institution for the rest of our lives. And he said, three is we would get sober and stay sober. And he said that, and under my breath, I had said a two-word sentence. First word was bull, and I shook my head no, because I knew, yeah, if I take a drink, I'm going to die. Give me a break. But two guys saw me say that, and after the meeting ended, they said, hey, can we talk to your son? And I said, sure. And one of them looked at me, and he said, Ron, he asked my name, and I told him, and he said, Ron, he said, we really don't care whether you stay here in Alcoholics Anonymous or not. That's 100% up to you. He said, in fact, if you want to drink, now back in 1976, when I got sober, you could go into a bar and you could order a gin and tonic, which was my beverage of choice, and it cost $1. And he took $1 out of his wallet. He said, if you want to drink, the first one's on me, buddy, go for it. He said, but if you want to stay sober, here's my business card. And he said, I'll write my home phone on it. So you have my work phone and my home phone. He said, if you want to stay sober, I'll do anything I can to help you to stay sober. And the other guy chimed in and he said the exact same words. But then they said, we're not here to sell you on whether you're an alcoholic or not. He said, that's a decision only you can make. He said, but alcoholism is a progressive illness. It gets worse. It never gets better. He said, look back on your life. Is your life worse now than it was a few years ago? And that took all the fight out of me, because I went to work for a company. I was very young. I was 20 years old when I went to work for this company in the sales business, and I was good at it. And I got a little promotion and then another promotion, another and another. When I was 25 years old, I was named national sales manager of that firm. They moved my wife and I from New York out to California. They had 6 offices around the country, and I ran the whole show for them. I grew up in a middle-class area. 25 years old, I'm making more money than my father ever dreamed of making in his life. Now, I come to Alcoholics Anonymous 3 years later than that. And the guy says, is your life worse now than it was a year or 2 or 3 ago? When I got here to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was unemployed. I was unemployable. I'd been that way for a year and a half. I had hair down to here. I had a long beard. I didn't bathe every day. I had a wife and a baby to support them. I tried to be a gambler, professional gambler. I went to the racetrack, bet horses, played cards half the night, drunk every day, came to Alcoholics Anonymous with a gun in my belt. And the man says, is your life worse today than it was a year or 2 or 3 ago? And it took all the fight out of me. But that's not what got me to Alcoholics Anonymous, those circumstances. The thing that got me to Alcoholics Anonymous was that I couldn't stop drinking no matter what I did. This was not my first try at getting sober. I had tried over and over and over on my own to stop drinking. And I'm not talking once or twice. I'm talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. I would come out of drunks and I would be sick and I would be hungover and I'd crawl off into the bathroom and I'd be sick. And then I would stand up and I'd hold on to the sink and I'd look in my own eyes. And when I threw up in the morning, I heaved so violently that there'd be tears coming down my face. And I'd look in my own eyes and I'd tell myself, I'll never do this again. I'll never be this sick. I'll never be this hungover, and mean it with everything I have. And within a day, 2 days tops, I'm drunk again, over and over and over and over. And on September 21st of 1976, I go on a drunk. I come off it the next morning. And the only difference between that drunk, and I'd been drunk every single day that year, and every one of those mornings up until then, I said to myself, I learned my lesson. I'll never do it again. I'll watch for this. It was the third drink that got me drunk. I'll never, do it this way and you won't drink. When I came off that last drunk, I said to me, I can't stop. I'm going to be drunk again today, and I don't want to be drunk again today. And that scared me. That scared me more than anything had ever scared me in my life. And I knew there was a program called Alcoholics Anonymous. My mother had told me about a friend of hers that went to AA years earlier. And I thought, if this lady went to Alcoholics Anonymous and stayed sober, maybe I can come here and somehow, some way, get 3 days of sobriety. That's all I wanted, was 3 days of sobriety. I never expected 3 days of sobriety because I couldn't go one day. Now, how I came up with 3 days is because, as you'll find out, I am so intelligent. My last drunk was a Tuesday night. Now, I came to on a Wednesday. And I figured, if this AA thing works, and I doubt if it will, but if it works, maybe you guys can help me to stay sober Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But I knew in my heart of hearts, nobody stays sober weekends. So I came here looking for 3 days of sobriety, and I haven't taken a drink from that day to this day. So I came here very desperate for sobriety, which was good. Okay. Nothing wrong with that. Desperation is a great thing. It got me to go to meetings. It got me to get a sponsor, et cetera, et cetera. But I didn't understand the disease of alcoholism. Now, I read the big book, okay, but I still didn't understand the disease of alcoholism. And why is emotional sobriety so important? Why are there so many people with longer term sobriety that we hit bottoms along the way where, like me, and I'll talk about mine, one of them, and probably more than one, where I say to myself, I have to step up my game. I have to do more. And like I said, in the beginning, I thought the disease of alcoholism was a drinking problem. And yet our big book differentiates between what they call a social drinker, a moderate drinker, a hard drinker, and an alcoholic. And they'll use the moderate drinker. Now, they say the moderate drinker may get in trouble due to his or her drinking. Maybe a spouse or significant other says, you get drunk again like that and it's over. I'm out of here. And that moderate drinker says, okay. And they stop drinking. They stop drinking. Then you have the hard drinker, moderate drinker on steroids. They're starting to get in a little bit more trouble with their alcoholism or with their hard drinking. But all of a sudden, that spouse or a boss or a doctor, as our big book says, you need to stop drinking. And they're able to do it. But then, as it says on page 21, but what about the real alcoholic? He or she may start off as a moderate drinker. We may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. But at some stage of our drinking careers, I begin to lose all control of my liquor consumption once I start. And then I go to page number 44, and it says, if when I honestly want to, I find I cannot quit entirely. See, this is the real alcoholic. I cannot quit entirely. Or if when I start to drink, I have little control over the amount I take, I'm probably an alcoholic. If that be the case, I may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Now, I had that happen in my life over and over and over, where I was unable to stop drinking. But I asked my sponsor, I said, why would they put that in there, that left to my own devices, I can't stop drinking? And he started to explain something to me that he called untreated alcoholism, a term I had never heard before, which is why a person like me needs emotional sobriety. Because without it, I suffer from untreated alcoholism. Being sober, but living in fear, living with insecurities, living with resentments, living with I'll get even. The world's a zero-sum game. I win, you lose, that type of thing. Like Bill talked about in his writings on emotional sobriety. If it looks like I'm winning, everything's great. But as soon as that's not happening, I'm back in trouble again. Well, they write here, and I didn't see this, but this, for a long time, but I can't, you just can't put it any better than the big book puts it. On page 51, he says, leaving aside the drink question, we talk about why life is so unsatisfactory. On page 52, he says, we're having troubles with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were a pride of misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. That doesn't mean we can't make money, but it means we don't get along with the people we work with. We have a feeling of uselessness. We're full of fear. We're unhappy. I go back to the doctor's opinion, and Dr. Silkworth writes, an alcoholic like me drinks for the effect of alcohol. That once I stop drinking, I become restless. Inside, these are inner feelings, okay? Inside me, I'm restless, I'm irritable. In other words, you piss me off. I walk around with resentments. I'm the type of guy, by the time I got out of the shower in the morning, By the time I got out of the shower in the morning, in my head, I was already rehearsing 3 arguments that I had to have at work that day. On the way to work, I get in a knockout, drag out fight with somebody that's not in the car. You guys ever do that? I got a brain that can wake me up in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning. It says, Ron, wake up, wake up. Now, it disguises itself as you have to go to the bathroom, but it says, wake up. Now I wake up and I go back to bed, and my head says to me, we're in a lot of trouble, man. We got to think about this thing. And I'm up half the night thinking about the fears that are going on in my life. So Silkworth writes that I drink for the effect of alcohol. Once I stop drinking, I'm restless, I'm irritable, I'm discontented. And the thing that makes me an alcoholic is a couple of drinks take all those feelings away. Just give me a gin and tonic or two and all those feelings go away. I made up an analogy years ago, and to me, it just makes sense, okay? And what it is I'm sitting here, it's a live meeting, and a mosquito comes down and bites me on the arm, and a mosquito bite comes up and it itches like crazy. It just itches like crazy. And Sam looks at me and he says, Ron, he says, don't scratch that mosquito bite. We had a speaker here last month, and he scratched the mosquito bite. We had to rush him to the hospital. They amputated his arm. Tom says the same thing to me. Don't scratch it. Don't scratch it, man. Last time it happened, they amputated. I go, it's itching like crazy. I go home. My wife sees a mosquito bite. She gets a look of fright in her face, like you don't want to believe. She says, look, you don't scratch that thing. Last time you scratched it, you lost your job. You were unemployed for 1.5 years. You got my car repossessed. You got my refrigerator repossessed, which is not the easiest thing in the world to do. We're running from everybody. Don't scratch. In fact, what I want you to do is go back to another meeting tomorrow and they'll tell you not to scratch the mosquito bite some more. Well, how long can you do that? But I never understood untreated alcoholism. The first 4 years of my sobriety, I had what I like to term meeting-based sobriety, and it kept me sober. It kept me sober, okay? I was at about 7 meetings a week as an average, okay? Some weeks might be 5, some weeks might be 10, but just about a meeting a day. I was in service. I was secretary in meetings. I was on the committee for our local conference where I lived. I was GSR at times. So I was into service in Alcoholics Anonymous. I worked through the steps once because I believe that's what you did. And then the steps were kind of an SOS call. And at 4 years of sobriety, as active as you can be in Alcoholics Anonymous, the best description I can give of me is, now I'm not talking about physically and I'm not talking about materially, because I went back to work, got a decent job. Physically, I got better. But I'm talking about emotionally. I'm talking about my relationship at home, my relationship with people, my own inner comfort. At 4 years of sobriety, I was worse sober than I was drunk. And I couldn't understand why. I couldn't get along in my own home. I could not. You know, I told you where I came from. I got my wife's refrigerator repossessed. And let me tell you, that is not easy to do. And we got a couple, I'm just looking around at the screen here, and we got a couple of young guys here. Let me just give you some, because we're married over 50 years now. So let me give you some relationship advice, okay? Do not, I repeat, do not get your wife's refrigerator repossessed. They don't forget it. If you get in a fight with them 50 years later, they'll still bring up that stupid refrigerator. So do not do that. But that's where we started out. Now I'm sober for 4 years and I get a job and it leads to a better job and a better job and a better job. And I start buying her stuff, good stuff like cars and houses. That's good stuff. Nothing wrong with that. But every time I walk in the house, I'm thinking, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do in this house. Why isn't dinner on the table? Why isn't the house clean? Why isn't, whatever the way it's supposed to be? I'm having problems with the people I work with. One day I'm their friend, the next day I'm their enemy, and I don't understand it. Emotionally, I'm in a lot of trouble. Okay. I'm suffering from anxiety attacks where I feel like I'm jumping out of my skin half the time. Okay. And other times I'm so depressed I can hardly get out of bed. That's why I love when Bill writes where you become a pride of misery and depression. When my sponsor read me those bedevilments, having problems with personal relationships and all that, I remember looking at him and I said to him, I said, Bob, that's drinking behavior. That's not drinking. That's when you drank. And he looked at me, he said, wait a minute, Ron. He said, when you asked me to be your sponsor, we made a deal. I said, yeah, okay. What was the deal? He said, we made a deal. You'd never lie to me and I'd never lie to you. I said, well, I never lied to you. He said, well, you told me you were a blackout drinker. You told me 98% of the time when you drank, you blacked out and then you came to a day or two or three later, like, what happened? Who have I been with? Now, was that a lie or were you telling the truth? I said, no, I was telling you the truth, bro. That's the way I drank. Get him down. Let's get it on. He said to me, then let me ask you a question. And the question he asked me, I had never thought about before. He said to me, what problems with personal relationships did you ever have drunk? He said, you weren't there. I never thought about that. He said, but how do you do now that you're sober? How do you do when you're at a meeting and you speak and then somebody talks after you and you perceive that they're contradicting you, but they're really trying to help you and the rest of the group? Maybe they have a lot more time or something else. Do you think to yourself, boy, I'm really glad that guy said something? I said, no, I'm hoping he has a painful heart attack and just drops dead on the floor. You know, I have problems with people when I'm sober. I'm thin-skinned. You hurt my feelings. And my head says, strike out. Well, at 4 years of sobriety, a little over 4 years of sobriety, I hit a bottom sober that was 100 times worse than the one I had drinking. I don't talk about this a lot, but tonight I will. What happened, I came home from work one on a Monday night. In fact, it was. Came home from work on a Monday night, and I walked in the house, and my eldest daughter at that time was 4 years old. And I walked in the house and she was sitting on the floor just watching TV. And my wife and I, during that time, we fought like cats and dogs. I mean, I couldn't be in that house 10 minutes without seeing something wrong, setting her straight. Now, when I say we fought, I never hit her in 50 years. I don't do that. But the yelling and the screaming and the looks and the sarcasm and all that stuff. So I walk in the house this Monday night. My little daughter's sitting on the floor watching TV. And I walk in, I said to her, hi, Allie, how you doing? And she stood up and she screamed at me. And she said to me, you get out of here and you leave me and my mother alone. And she peed in her pants just looking at me. And that kid had never seen me drunk. I sobered up. She wasn't even 6 months old. I never physically abused her. I never physically abused her mother. But that's what untreated alcoholism did to my family. It destroyed them. I work with a ton of guys. I sponsor over 40 men in Alcoholics Anonymous, most of them with a lot of time in Alcoholics Anonymous, that for X amount of years suffered from untreated alcoholism, just like I did for the first 4 years. And I remember I turned that day and I just walked out of the house. I was in tears and I just walked out of the house. And I went to another meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I ran into a man that turned me around. He talked about what I've been talking about for the last 20 minutes or so. He called it untreated alcoholism. He said, for the first 2.5 years of my sobriety, this is the way I treated my family. And it was like he was living in my home. Things like you give her the silent treatment, let her guess what she did this time, that type of stuff. He talked about being angry at work with the people he worked with, and all of that, and having problems with people in Alcoholics Anonymous. One day they're your friend, the next day they're your enemy, and but then he flipped the coin over and he said he found an answer in Alcoholics Anonymous. He said that his answer came through a God that he had met in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, through this God and through repeated work on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, he was able to treat his family okay. And that hit me over the head like a ton of bricks. He said, when he went to work, he liked the people he worked with. He said, when he looked in the mirror, he liked what he saw. And I went up to this man after that meeting and I told him, I said, Bob, I said, I'm sober for 4 years. I said, I'm in more trouble sober than I was drunk. And I am not a high bottom guy. I said, I actually sat last month and thought of committing suicide. I can't shut my head off. I don't know what's wrong with me. I have one good day and then 4 bad ones. And I don't understand it. He's the first guy I opened up to, but he said to me, he said, Ron, I'm with a bunch of people tonight. He said, but I'll tell you what, I just opened a business. He said, I start at 9 o'clock, but why don't I get in tomorrow at 8:30? You meet me at 8:30 and we'll talk for a while. I showed up at his place of business the next day. I stayed with him all day long. And I told him what was going on. He looked at me because I said to him, what do you think is wrong with me, Bob? And he said, what you have is what we call untreated alcoholism. A term I had never heard before. I said, what is that? I said, I haven't had a drink in 4 years. I go to 7 meetings a week. I sponsor 2 guys, got asked to speak somewhere once. I said, what do you mean I suffer from untreated alcoholism? He said, Ron, alcoholism has nothing to do with drinking except drinking treats it. Yeah, once we take the first drink, we're off and running, and we all have different bottoms that get us here. But it's the underlying alcoholism that has to be treated in order to stay comfortable to achieve long-term sobriety. Things I had never heard before. He said, my answer was in the steps. I said, I did the steps. I did them when I was sober 9, 10 months, did all 12 of them, wrote the inventory, did the 5th step, made amends, everything. He said, no, Ron, it's not what you did. He said, I'm going to show you how to take the steps out of the book and apply them in your life. He said, because this is the last man, the thing this man said to me. He said it that day, but he also said it the last time I ever saw him before he passed away, which was 22 years ago now. I went to his hospital room. Last thing he ever said to me was the same thing he said that day. He said, the name of this disease is alcoholism. It's not alcoholism. It don't go away because you're sober a long time. It goes away because you're treating it through the steps, through a relationship with God. He said, and I'll show you how to take the steps out of the book and apply them in your life so that you don't have to drink, so that you can get comfortable in your own skin, so that you can have a good relationship at home and at work and driving a car. When you look in the mirror, you like what you see. And this man started, and he took me through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I told you what happened with my daughter. I'm going to tell you this, about, 7, 8, 9 months went past, something like that. And one night I'm driving home from work, and I get to the driveway and I pull in, and my daughter and a little friend of hers are walking up and down on the grass, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So I stopped the car and I opened the window. I said, hey, Allie, what are you guys doing? And she comes running over to me with her little friend. She says, Dad, we're practicing. I said, what are you practicing for, Allie? She says, me and her are going to have a parade for you around the block. She says, because you're the neatest daddy in the whole wide world. Now, how do you get from them peeing in their pants to that in 7, 8, 9 months? How do you get that? How do you have a marriage for over 50 years when at 4 years of sobriety, when we got married, my wife went through 6 years of the drinking stuff and then 4 years of untreated alcoholism. We didn't go 2 days without one of us moving out. I'm out, and that type of stuff. Neither one of us has asked for a divorce in 40 years. 40 years. And we have the best relationship of any 2 people I know. Through an application of steps. Does that mean I want, because, and I like to say this a lot when I'm asked to talk about emotional sobriety, and about steps. I'm of the belief, and anything I say, anything I've said or say, let me say this: if you work the program differently than I do, and you're getting good results, keep doing what you're doing. My way, it's not my way or the highway. All I'm sharing is my own experience, how I read our books, what I get out of our literature, and what I do with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's all I can share with you is my own experience, my own personal experience. And part of my experience is I try the best I can to work and to live the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Anybody that knows me knows that that's the truth. I am a seeker of a better relationship with God. The two most important words of the 12 step come out of step 11 for me, and that is seek and improve. I try to seek a relationship with a power greater than myself, and I try to improve my program. I try to improve. How do I take an inventory at a deeper level? How do I take step 6 at a deeper level? Two of the steps that have become very, very important to me, and I'll talk about these and kind of wind it down from there, have become steps 10 and step 11. And I'll talk to you about what I mean by trying to improve my program. Something came to my attention. I better keep the big book here. Something came to my attention, and I was probably sober somewhere between 35 and 40 years. I had done repeated work on the steps for years and years and years. But all of a sudden, it kind of hit me, and I don't remember how many years I was sober, but I was far from a newcomer, that, you know what? I'm pretty good at restraint of pen and tongue. I really am. And I'm going to be talking about step 10 here. I'm really good at that. I don't get in a lot of arguments at home. Before I retired, I didn't get in many problems at work or with friends or any of that type of stuff. I'm pretty good at that. So if I'm looking at step 10, like I did in the beginning, if I say something wrong, if David calls me or I call him and we get in a conversation and all of a sudden it winds up escalating over something, that doesn't happen very often. But if, in the beginning, I thought, okay, that's step 10. I said something wrong to him. So now I got to call him up and apologize for it and make amends. And that's what I thought step 10 was about. All of a sudden it hit me. I'm sober 35, 40 years that, and I think some of you will probably relate to this. Okay. And especially those of us with longer term sobriety. I live out there, but my problems aren't out in the world anymore. My problems are in here. The big book says the disease is centered in my mind, not my body. So, step 10 says that I've now entered the world of the spirit. So I had to figure out, what does that mean? Have I done that? And I have done that. I know God exists. There is no doubt in my mind. But then it says my next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. So how can I take this to the next level? And here's where I messed up on step 10 until I came to this realization. It says continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And here's the word I missed. It says when these crop up. You see, what I thought it said up until that point was if these crop up because I'm not working the program right. It's not what it says. It says when these crop up, at once I ask God to remove them. So I started to watch my thoughts. Now, I've been doing this for a long time. I told you I'm sober 44 years. So I've been doing this for, 5 or 10 years now. And I don't, I guess I'm going to open it for a good half hour for people to talk. And maybe you'll all take my inventory and go, boy, that's no program if that's what you're doing. But I will tell you, I have never gone 2 consecutive days, and I can't think of one day in all of these years where in my head, okay, not any physical action or anything else, but in my head, some resentment, some old hurt or something like that hasn't come back, some fear, some dishonest thought, some self-centeredness hasn't popped up. So I've taken step 10 to almost stand on my shoulder and watch my thoughts throughout the day. And as things pop up, at once I work step 6. At once I work step 6. Am I really willing to have this removed entirely? Because I can tell you, sometimes if you're like me, sometimes I can go back in my mind and think about some injustice that was done to me when I was a kid or something. And man, I don't want to give it up. It's like an ice cream sundae with a cherry on top. I mean, to just let him off I'm not going to say anything and I could smile at him, but can I just think about it? How miserable. I mean, self-pity sometimes to me is delicious. I don't know how you guys feel about it. Am I really willing to give it up? So I find that this increases my relationship with God. Okay. Most of the time that works. Most of the time, that's all I have to do is work steps 6 and 7, and I'm set free. Sometimes it doesn't work. Yesterday, I had some stuff happen. It was in my head. I tried step 6 and 7 along with step 10, didn't work. I called my sponsor, told him what was going on. We had probably an hour's discussion. Time I got off the phone with him, it was gone. Then I turned my thoughts to trying to help somebody else. By that time, I'm able to live smoothly. But step 10 to me goes into step 11. And this has been a game changer for me, and I'll close with it. If somebody's struggling a little bit with step 11, maybe this will help you. It's helped me. It's something I discovered in the last year or so, and it's just really been big in my life. Because I'm a guy that came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't have a religious background. I came here not believing in anything. When I was sober 2 months, I heard a guy who came from a very religious background, but he had a God of fear. And somebody told him, make up a God. He said, if he existed, maybe he could help you. He said, forget that God of fear. And the guy went back. He showed him a list of a few things he made up the next day. And the guy said, well, start praying to that, see what happens. And he said, and I'm sober 11 years. And I was sober 2 months. And that was a start for me. And I went home that night and I made up a list. I said, if there's such a thing as God, these would be some of the things I would want. And it's matured from there without a doubt. But I made a beginning. I've done a lot of things as far as prayer and meditation. When this guy came in my life at 4 years, he taught me that there were 2 sides to a prayer, something I had never heard before. I said, what do you mean there are 2 sides to a prayer? He said, well, there's you talking to God, but then there's God talking to you. I said, well, God doesn't talk to me. I said, I'm not Bill Wilson. I've never had a ball of light come in the room or anything like that. He said, I want you to try something as an experiment, see what happens with it. I said, what do you want me to try, Bob? He said, what I want you to do is I want you to talk to God about whatever's going on in your life. If you have some fear, talk to him about it, or anything else that's going on in your life. But then I want you to keep your eyes and your ears open, because God will answer you, but you've got to keep your eyes and your ears open. He said, as an example, he said, I'm your sponsor. He said, anytime you've asked me a question, have I tried to answer it? I said, yeah, you have. He said, well, wouldn't it make sense that God would try to answer it? I said, yeah, but he doesn't. He said, that's because you're not looking. He said, imagine if you called me and you said, hey, Bob, I've got this resentment. How do I get rid of it? And then you hung up and you never heard the answer. He said, so keep your eyes and ears open. See if you get the answers. And that started to work for me. I would talk to God about, let's say I had a fear or a resentment or whatever. And I'm talking to God throughout the day. Could you help me with this resentment? Or could you help me with this fear? And I go to a meeting that night and the secretary says, our subject tonight is resentment. And I'm thinking, hey, thanks, God. I appreciate that. And I started to use that. Well, Bob passed away when I was sober 22 years. I got another sponsor. His name was Paul Martin. I heard some of the guys talking about somebody with 60 odd years of sobriety. When Paul died, he had 62 years of sobriety. He lived in Chicago, great AA member. And he became my sponsor. I was sober 22 years at the time. And we get into a conversation about prayer and meditation. And Paul was also a believer in repeated work on all 12 steps, trying to take them at a deeper level all the time. I'll tell you this before I get into this. Paul was my sponsor for 12 years until he passed away. I called him once or twice a week because I live out here in California and he lived in Chicago. But I talked to him once or twice a week and I saw him a few times a year. At least every 3 or 4 months, he would say to me, Ron, when was the last time you did a thorough inventory? Have you swapped any inventories recently? Is your life an open book? He said, how much time are you spending in prayer and meditation? When we first got together, he said to me, he said, how much time do you spend in prayer? I said, I pray a lot. He said, what about meditation? I said, well, I don't meditate. I don't even know how. I said, I had a great sponsor for 22 years. I said, but, or for 17 years. I got him at 4.5 years of sobriety. I said, but he never had me meditate. He said, well, how long are you sober? I said, I'm sober 22 years. And he said, well, with 22 years of sobriety, Ron, you should be meditating 3 hours a day. And I said to him, are you crazy, man? I said, I work full time. I got a family. I said, I can't meditate 3 hours a day. So I start negotiating with him. And I get him down to 5 minutes. That's pretty good, isn't it? From 3 hours to 5 minutes. At Paul's 60th birthday, he had a big birthday party. He's a pretty well-known AA member and sponsored guys from all over the country. And he has a big AA party that I went to. And I'm talking to all these guys from all over. And I found out my negotiation wasn't that great because he would just pick somebody. So if Charles asked him to sponsor me, he'd say, how long are you sober? You tell him, he said, you should be meditating 9 hours a day. You go, what are you, crazy? How's 5 minutes? All he wanted you to do was make a beginning. Make a beginning. He started me out with breathing meditation. I started to do that. I've done passage meditation, mantras. I've got many, many books on meditation. I've done many things over these last 22 years now to try to get better and better at meditation. But I found something about a year ago by a guy that's now become my spiritual advisor in Alcoholics Anonymous, an Episcopal priest by the name of Father Bill in Texas, who talked about something called two-way prayer, something that they did in the early days from 1935 to 1939. And it's the reason and it's been a game changer for me. And that's the only reason I'm going to share it. If you want to try it, it's really helped me as far as my emotional sobriety and my relationship with my higher power. Because Bill writes, in step 11, he says, on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours a day. We consider our plans for the day. So what do I have going on for the day? Okay, I ask God to direct my thinking, that I be divorced from all the self-centered stuff. But then it goes on to say, God gave me brains to use. My thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when my thinking is cleared of wrong motives. In thinking about our day, I may face indecision. That happens. I may not be able to determine which course to take. Now, here's where two-way prayer comes in. Here I ask God for an inspiration, an intuitive thought or decision. I relax and take it easy. I don't struggle. I'm often surprised how the right answers come after I've tried this for a while. What used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of my mind. See, that's what I want. That talks about that in step 7 in the 12 and 12, that what I want is a working relationship with God, not something I just pray to, but something I ask and then get guidance, get direction with. So what two-way prayer is, And like I said, if you read our history, it's what every one of the early members of Alcoholics Anonymous did, every single 100% of them. And what it is, I sit down, in fact, I'll read one of them to you just to give you an idea. But I sit down in the morning and I think about what's going on in my life. Do I have any fears going on, or insecurities, or do I have something going on that I need to take care of during the day? And I talk to God about it. I write it down. And then before I do that, I read something spiritual, maybe a page of something, not a whole book, but just a page or a couple of paragraphs, just to get me in the right frame of mind. And then I write down what's on my heart, what's really on my heart, and what I really need God's help with. And then whatever comes to me, I write that down. So I'll give you a good example of one. On September 30th, my youngest daughter gave birth to another one of our grandchildren, our third grandchild. But this grandchild was 2 months early, and we didn't know if she was going to make it through the night. Now, she has a 5-year-old, and we got a call about 10, 11 o'clock at night that they were at the hospital, and could we pick up little Hannah so she could, spend the night with us. And I drove over to the hospital. My son-in-law, my daughter are out with my little granddaughter. They said, don't worry. The doctor said nothing's going to happen. We should be able to pick her up sometime during the night as soon as they discharge her. At 12:15 that night, my granddaughter Maddie was born. And the next thing we heard is we had no idea if she was going to live or not. Now, that's pretty heavy stuff. So I got up early the next morning, and this is what I wrote. God, this is on 9/30, 2020. God, I'm scared. Michelle gave birth to little Maddie, way premature, 31 weeks. When I read about possible complications when a baby is born this early, it scares the hell out of me. For her, Dan, Hannah, and Ann, that's my wife. I don't know if Michelle could take it. This daughter had a stroke 4 years ago. I don't know if Michelle could take it. Please help this baby be okay. I feel the same way about Dan, Hannah, and Ann. Please show me how to act so I'm of help to them and I don't say or do stupid things. Now I meditate for 30 seconds and then I just let the pen go. My son, be supportive, be positive. Don't voice your concerns unless they bring it up. And then go back, because I researched this, then go back to the success rate with preemies at 31 weeks. If they bring up their fears, be empathetic. Don't be a tough guy or a no-feeling know-it-all, which I can do that in a heartbeat. God gives me the direction I need. If you need to talk to someone, talk to a friend. Know I am with all of you, including little Maddie at all times. And then I put little boxes underneath as far as the guidance I get from God, and am I willing to follow that for the day? It's the same thing as any of us that sponsor people. A sponsee calls and you say, do this, and they don't do it. Well, if you talk to them every day for a year and you say, do this, and they never do it, after a while, it's like, whoa. But if at least with me, when my sponsor gave me directions and I'd call him, I'd say, okay, I did that. I know he felt better and I felt better about it. When God gives me guidance and direction and says, look for my direction, just like Bob Anderson said to me many years ago, there's two sides to a prayer, but you have to keep your eyes and ears open. When I do that, I get the guidance and I get the direction for my life. Why is that important? Because then I get comfortable in here. I ask God how I should treat my wife. How that baby, by the way, is great today. She's 3.5 months old. She's doing fantastic. Really, really great. I have a life today through emotional sobriety, through repeated work on the steps, through trying to apply this stuff to the best of my ability, not perfectly, but to the best of my ability, through being real. Letting guys know and people know. I mean, I've done speaker meetings where I've got on and said, but I got my head up my butt right now. I don't try to come on like Mr. AA. I hope I didn't do that tonight. I don't, I Alcoholics Anonymous has saved my life. It's given me a life that is better than anything I ever could have imagined. And in my case, it came through the steps. It came through a relationship with God. And it came through those 2 words in step 11, seeking a better relationship with the higher power of my understanding and trying to improve my program of Alcoholics Anonymous. So Sam, thank you for asking me to do this. I hope somebody got something out of what I said, and we'll open it up for comments, questions, whatever you got going on next.
Great job. Thank you so much, Ron. Thanks for coming out tonight.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking me.
Hey, so what we normally do is, just have somebody call on a few people. So do you see anybody in here that you might know or that you may want to call on? You can just.
Sure. I'll call on people. I'll start with David from South Carolina.
Thank you, Ron. I knew that was coming. I'm alcoholic. My name's David.
David.
And you might think it kind of weird that I live in Columbia, South Carolina, and Ron's just out of Sacramento. But I just moved here about 3 or 4 months ago. So Ron's been my sponsor for going almost 2 years now. And anything I say probably is going to just kind of parrot what Ron said, but I'll be brief. And I've just had 25 years sober, and at about 23 to 24 years, somewhere in there, I was up against the wall. I was up against that emotional wall where I was suffering from untreated alcoholism. And you read from Language of the Heart, and I love this term, this one phrase out of that, of what was read, little spiritual development. Over all those years, I had little spiritual development. I was never good with the morning stuff, never good with the prayer and meditation. And so I've been Ron turned me on to the 2-way prayer, I guess about 2 to 3 months ago now, something like that. And we had talked about it, and I tried it a couple of times, and this and that. And then we talked, and he said, I challenge you to do it for 30 days without skipping a day. If you'll do it for 30 days, you'll see the benefit. And I started to see the benefit after about 2 weeks. And I've been doing it 2 to 3 months now. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to read something. This again is from Language of the Heart. And this Bill wrote about step 11, and he was lamenting the fact of how Alcoholics Anonymous had kind of got away from the emphasis of step 11. Like Ron said, they were doing this 2-way prayer in the beginning and the 4 absolutes and all that sort of thing. And just real brief, to 12, this is what Bill said: 12 stepping, talking at meetings, recitals of drinking histories, confessions of our defects, and what progress we have made with them no longer provide us with release and abundant life. Our lack of growth is often revealed in an unexpected calamity or a big emotional upset. Then I'll just skip a little bit over. It said, basically it says, it looks like we're good on the outside. Everybody tells us we're doing great, but inside we know different. And that was my experience. I knew different. I knew for whatever reason, I was not doing as well as I looked on the outside. So the chances are better. So what causes this, Bill says? So the chances are better than even that we shall locate our trouble in our misunderstanding or neglect of AA step 11, prayer, meditation, and the guidance of God. The other steps this sentence I love, the other steps can keep us sober and somehow functioning, but step 11 can keep us growing if we try hard and work at it continually. And that's been my experience just in the last couple of months, and I'm 25 years sober. And so if you're new, you don't have to wait that long. You can start doing this right away. And then I'll close just with this real quick. And I'm going to hold this up here if you can see it. Can you see my red line down the side there? Here it is. Yeah, that's a paragraph. These are the promises from doing step 11 continually, like he says, and working at it. As he goes along, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but as he goes along with his process of prayer, he begins to add up the results. So what are the results of doing it? If he persists, he will almost surely find more serenity, more tolerance, less fear, less anger. He will acquire quiet courage. He can look so-called failure and success for what they really are, and so on and so on and so on. There's more promises here than the 9th step and the 10th step and whatever promises you can find in the book. So sorry if I went on a little too long, but I just really wanted to pile on top of what Ron said, just because it really, really has helped me. And I had, at 5 years sober, I'll close with this, and I had this happen a few times over the years, but at 5 years sober, my wife and I were having a yelling match like we always used to have. And she said, "You're worse than you were when you were drinking." And I was 5 years without drinking. I won't say sober, 5 years without drinking. So thank you, Ron. What a great talk. And thanks, Sam, for doing this. And I'm really glad I checked in tonight.
Thanks, David. Tom, you're up. Tom Ewell.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. That was kind of shook me up a bit. You know, one of the things that I thought of, I try to write my nightly review every night. I don't, but I try to, and I do it a lot of nights. And I know Charlie P said, "Discipline is the horse I ride," but I didn't say I ride it every night. You know, so that's kind of my deal. But I do it a lot, and you know, I remember something that Don P said when he got to, "Was I loving and kind toward all today?" And he said some days he didn't do a thing. He didn't mess with anybody. He didn't, you know, nothing untoward happened. But every day, some son of a bitch in his head, you know, and so he could never. And I've pretty much been like that. I mean, you know, loving and kind toward all. Very, very rarely could I say yes to that, you know, that kind of thing. So that kind of brought up for me. But my home group, about 3 years ago, we had a workshop with a husband and wife. They're since divorced, but Chloe C, she's in Dallas, and when we got to the 11th step, she did the two-way prayer and gave us an example of how it had worked. It was really dynamic. I mean, it's really, and of course I'd heard about that, and it's a big deal in Akron. You know, a lot of people in Akron have been doing that for a long time. And I said to myself, well, I've really got to start doing that. Well, that was 3 years ago, and I haven't. So it was a wake-up call for me, and I really appreciate your entire talk. And your story is a lot like mine. You know, 4 or 5 years is when I really hit a wall and was ready to be told that I was suffering from untreated alcoholism and doing something about it. So exactly the same thing. I know I got sober in '86, but in '76, I was 28 years old. And my mother wrote me a letter and said I ought to join Alcoholics Anonymous. And she had just been out to California to visit really dear old friends of ours from New York who had moved out there. He'd gotten sober in '66 in Arizona someplace, but they lived in LA. And she said that, and she was out there for their 50th anniversary. And so while she was there, they introduced her to a lot of people. My mom was a drunk. I mean, you know, I'm sure she wasn't sober while she was out there, but probably on her best behavior. And she said, "Oh, I had a wonderful time. I met really nice people in Alcoholics Anonymous. I met Dr. Kildare's father," she goes. And you got to be old enough to know what that means. But oh, she was just thrilled with that, you know, that Chuck C was, you know, Dr. Kildare's father, you know, and all that. And she said, "You really ought to look into this. You know, I think you really need it." And I thought, are you kidding me? You know, you're a drunk and you're telling me to go to A&A, which is probably some Christian cult or something anyway.
Yeah.
You know? So anyway, if I had gone, if I'd listened to her, maybe you and I'd be in the same league there. But I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
Juanita sitting over there?
She is.
Now let her go. You're up.
Hi, Ron. Boy, you know, thank you so much. I just, this message is so simple. It's so simple. It's just practicing. Tom and I were sitting here and just every once in a while, you know, one of us would say something. And what kept coming to my mind was the word practice, you know, practice. Am I going to practice? And every morning I say, I take those pages on 86, 87, 88. And then I take from the 10th step, help me grow in effectiveness, understanding, love and tolerance. And I take from step 9, show me the way of kindness, patience, tolerance, and love. And, there's a couple of other places that and so as you were telling me what you were doing, I thought, this is it. This is just what we do. This is, it's not rocket science. It's not, you don't have to have a PhD to do this stuff. You just have to do it. You just have to do it. And one of the things that I've been adding to my prayers in the morning is something that I didn't want to do for a long time. And every time that Tom and I start out on a trip, we sit in the car and we say a prayer and, ask for safety for us, for, people we leave behind, wherever they may be, and ask God to help us enjoy the trip. And at the end, Tom always pipes up with this word, and let us be of help to someone. And I just want to go, what's wrong with you? What do you mean? Let us be of help to somebody. We're on vacation. It's like, come on, give it a rest, dude, And for I'd say the last 5-6 months, I have seriously been adding to my prayers in the morning. God, show me how to take a kindly and tolerant view of everyone, but show me what I can do for your children who are sick and who are hurting. It comes from, I think, a vision for you. Show me what I can do for your children who are sick and hurting. And I'll tell you, it's there's rarely a day that someone who I know or someone who I don't know gives me a call, sends me a text, and asks, "Can I call you? Can I call you? Can I talk about this?" And I was some time ago, I said to Tom, I said, I'm so tired of working with these alcoholics who always say, "Man, I really related to your Al-Anon story. Can you help me with your?" I said, I want to talk to those family members, those family members who are just straight up sick family members, the nutty ones, the crazy ones, and for some reason, God keeps saying, here's another alcoholic. And finally, I got it. They grew up in active alcoholism. It's like, hello, And I could just keep going because you just brought so much up for me. It's simple. It's simple. It's just, am I going to do it? Am I going to submit to the discipline of the practice? And you were just crystal clear.
Right.
Thank you so much, Ron.
Thanks, Juanita.
And it was,
I don't know this guy, but I love jokes. And Roy, you're up, man. That was a funny joke you said.
Thank you, Ron. I appreciate what you said. That was a good presentation on emotional sobriety.
Thank you.
I got sober in 1972, and for some long time now, I've been sharing my 10th step with 7 other guys every night. And what it has done for me is that particular thing is made me aware throughout the day of my actions and behavior. And I too look at the 6th and 7th step most of the time when that comes up, because character defects are something that plagued me all my life, and I have to be careful with it. I had a spiritual experience when I got sober the last time in 72 that changed my life. It completely changed my life, and I've had a good relationship with God ever since that day. And I like to say this, that my wife was talking to a divorce lawyer that week, and in about 3 weeks, she and I will be married 66 years. And that's probably one of the great miracles of my life. I'm 84 years old. I'm in pretty good physical shape. I'll be sober 49 years in March. I don't have anything to bitch about. My life is so strong, and my life is so good. And we've had problems. We've had things happen. I had a whole year of combat flashbacks. It like destroyed everything around me. And fortunately, I was able to have a sponsor that worked me through that. I had a son that was in a horrible car accident. And I was 100 miles away, and I had to drive at 100 miles, not knowing if my son was alive or dead. And my prayer all the way was, Lord, give me whatever I need. I couldn't pray that he get well, or I just said, give me what I need. And fortunately, he made it through it. We had a grandson a few years ago that was 18 years old, got involved in drugs and alcohol, and hanged himself. And the beautiful part about this whole thing was not one time that any of those troubles that I ever think about taking a drink. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the people in this fellowship, and God as I understand him, have truly made me a grateful alcoholic. I'm grateful to be here, and I thank you for your share, and I look forward to seeing you somewhere down the road. Thank you.
Makes two of us. How about Kate from Akron, Ohio?
Hi, I'm Kate. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Kate.
Thank you so much for your share. There was so much wonderfulness in it. I too have keep hearing about two-way prayer. You know, I'm supposed to be doing this, I think, because I keep hearing it like in a, a lead or something. And then I missed out on a meeting that was going to go over the two-way prayer, but I looked it up on YouTube, and it was that, who did you say? Father Bill. Yeah, it was, he's on YouTube.
Yes, I know.
And with a group of people, and, they all write it and share about it. And I thought, well, that's easy. I can do that. And I do pray every morning and focus on 10 and 11. And for some reason, I'm not doing it. I'm not writing it down. And I could use it, but so now I'm hearing it again. So, feel like God's knocking, like try this, So thank you for the wake up call on that. I got a lot out of you, and I respect your sobriety and your years and your message. And I'm just real grateful to be here tonight. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Kate. Sam, how about you?
Sam, I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Sam.
Yeah, and this is such a privilege to just be able to sit back and relax with this meeting and listen to all the great speakers and just see all my friends here. But I'll tell you, it's so funny how I'll start sponsoring guys now who are, 8, 10, 11, 12 years sober, and they're just off, and I've just been off for the past year or whatever. And one of the first things I ask is, are you doing prayer or meditation? Like, you doing any meditation? They do prayer. All of them hit their knees and pray, but are you doing any meditation? And almost all the time you hear oh man, I'm just not into that meditation thing. I just can't say I have a bit. It's like, I got a really busy mind, so I don't meditate. It's like a really, really overweight person going, I'm just really overweight, so I don't want to exercise. You know what I mean? It's the same thing. It's like the exact same thing. It's like, well, no shit. That's the problem. I mean, I remember I was about 10 years sober, and I had a guy stop by and ask me, how much are you meditating? And I said, well, I'm not really into that. I do a lot of prayer, but I just, the meditation thing I've gotten away from. He said, why don't you do 5 to 10 minutes every morning? And I started doing that, and just call me back in a week. I called him back in a week, and my life had changed. I was, all those razor sharp edges had rounded off. And, the big problem with being an alcoholic is having to live with an alcoholic helmet strapped to your head all the time. I mean, it's exhausting. So anything that provides relief for that, I need, and I too have hit, this essay is so important to me because dependencies creep back up into my life like carbon monoxide just comes in. It's odorless and whatever, and all of a sudden I've got these gifts. I've been really, life is good, the financial thing is going really good, and then all of a sudden something happens and I start to stress out. Something doesn't go my way, and I realize, oh my God, I've developed this awful dependency on money for, approval. Like at one point, you get up here and you make this amount of money and you say, man, if I ever made this amount of money, that'd be amazing. Then you make that amount of money. And then one month you go this amount of money, and then month you go back down to that money. And you're like, God, this is terrible. And get all depressed, and you think, the hell is wrong with me? And I see that, one of the biggest probably dependencies I've seen that it's really taken a long time to address and be mindful of is approval from people. Like, I used to just be such an approval junkie, just all the time, just needed it all the time. And how I knew I was approval junkie is if somebody had some disapproval, it just broke me all up. I mean, it really pissed me off, or really just broke me up and really crushed me. I didn't realize how sensitive I was. And, I love, Tom always talks about how Don said, true freedom is not having anybody left to impress. And I love that. Also, you mentioned Bob Anderson. I don't know if you're talking about Bob Anderson from the primetime meetings out there.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of his stuff, read his stuff. Very cool guy. I wish I would have known that he had sponsored you. I had tons of questions about that guy. What just an interesting dude.
You got my phone number.
Yeah. And Paul Martin, heard a lot about him. But for me, that part that Bill talks about, living quietly, my brain no longer races in excitement, grandiosity, or depression. It's funny how my brain just runs those bases when I'm out of whack, when I'm not living my life in the disciplines of 10, 11, and 12. And the step 10 thing that you talked about, I mean, that whole thing about being a watcher, like, I don't know how long it took me before I started realizing that says, I used to think step 10 was like, I mean, who the hell really does that? They just mislabeled it. Step 11 at night, you do your review at night, you figure out, you look back on your day. And I never thought about that whole mental frontier of watching, being the watcher. Watch when the spear comes out. It's not just about your outside life. How's your inner life?
That's right.
And I'll tell you, my inner life has gotten incredibly awesome over the last several years. And so much so that I can't tolerate, my tolerance for bullshit in there is a lot less than it used to be. You know what I mean? Like, I can't deal with fear the same way I used to. I don't tolerate as long as I do. I can't deal with resentment as long as I do. I don't tolerate it as long. I don't want to hear myself and my own selfish ambitions talk for very long, before I kind of laugh at it and just like, so you just had so much great stuff to say. And I really can't add much to it other than, I think that we can always go deeper with the disciplines of 10, 11, and 12. And the disciplines of 10 and 11, and I hear people who talk about step 11 who don't meditate. And they go, oh, I can't, but I don't really do the sit quiet meditation thing. I've got a really busy mind. It's just not my thing. And I go, well, no shit, it's not your thing. You know what I mean? That might be the problem. That might be why you have such a busy mind. So for me, everything you said just was great. So thanks for calling on me, Ron.
Hey, thanks for inviting me here. It was a fun meeting. Mary Thayer.
Hi, Mary Thayer, alcoholic. Gosh, I could have listened to you. Why didn't you speak an hour and a half? It's like the old days here. I came in a little bit before you, or maybe I don't know, 73 I came in. And it came in North Hollywood. Yeah.
Alabama, huh?
Yeah, very well. Yeah, exactly. Alabama, Jane Grey, all of them, So I was raised with that type of questioning. As a sponsor, my sponsors always questioned me. I don't know if you know Hugh and Bev Douglas, but
very well, sure.
Yeah, well, that was the ones that saved my life, and she was my sponsor until she died. And Hugh sponsored me just as much. So, just hearing you again with the simplicity and the black lines and what is this saying, and just read Hugh would always say to me, just read the black lines, not the white, the black. This is what it says. And as the years go on, all of a sudden I see it, and then I see it deeper. And like yourself, I was raised to continue to do the steps, at least I was, over and over and over and over again. And that it was the main problem centered in my mind. And I had so many things that I identified with you. I mean, you know, I remember when I was right around the same time you were, and I realized I was a single parent, and you know, Hugh used to always point out that line that would say, a better demonstration of these principles are in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. And and he'd say homes. And I never wanted to look at what I was doing and what I had done as a mother. And because my daughter was just before she turned 10 years old when I came in. And I'd been raising her since she was 9 months old. And if you want to call it raising her, I'm eternally grateful that AA, you know, that my babysitter's mother 12-stepped me. Her name, you probably knew Rosemary. Did you know Rosemary?
Don't know that.
William.
Name,
Anyway, she 12-stepped me in. She was sponsored by Clancy at the time, and very good member, really good member. But everything you said, I realized how blessed I was with that old time AA. That point where they really didn't listen too much to my, you know, I couldn't tell stories. They'd say, "You want sympathy? Look in the dictionary between shit and syphilis, you'll
That's
find
right.
it." You
Yeah,
know,
they say that to me too.
yeah, it was like, you know, I mean, we weren't patted into the grave. We were asked to do it. And in the beginning of my big book, I have a saying that says, after everything's said and done, more is said than done. And I realized that was my life. And so my goal was to try to do something before I talked about it. And that's been my goal for a lot of years. And I loved how you talked about the two-way prayer and associated it with, that's what the Oxford group did. And,
That's right.
and I remember at 5 years, I moved up to Maine, and I wanted to go back to California. They were all saying, go back to California, because I didn't come in there very nicely with how I didn't think they were doing the program right. And, but I remember somebody had asked me to speak on the 11th step, and so, and it was, you know, it was going to be like in, I don't know how many weeks or whatever, somebody had said, come and do that. And I called up a guy by the name of Dick B. He was living in Hawaii at the time.
I knew Dick.
And I said, I'm going to do this. And I want to know what I should look at. And he sent me some of his books, you know, and I remember reading about that, where they would say, upon awakening, you ask God to direct your thinking, that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, and self-seeking motives. And then they stopped, because the minute they says your thought life will be on a higher plane. And that means that there'll be new thoughts that will come in. It's not just, it doesn't say your thinking will be on a higher plane, but your thoughts will be on a higher plane. And so they stopped, and they had a piece of paper and a pencil, and they'd just wait. And they'd say, they just wrote down the next thought that came into their mind. It could be, well, I wish this was all done, or whatever, you know, it wouldn't make any difference. But I decided to do that. And I did that over and over. And all of a sudden, I wrote things down that I knew that I didn't write. And that was and then I read what the 11th step actually said. It said, we're improving our conscious contact. In step 10, it said I'd entered the world of the spirit. So obviously God had gotten on board somehow, and I'd opened a part of me where that was blocking that sunlight of the spirit. And then finally I had connected with that presence deep down inside. And so my journey has been like yours. I cried tonight when you spoke, because I too am a person that I just can't get enough of this. And, you know, I love that line that says, this is limitless. You know, I might have 47 years, but I only have a day at a time. And if God is constantly revealing things to me, God, I want to be awake to find out what it is. I'm so tired of whatever crap that was going through my mind. I mean, I realized just the other day I had a miracle happen. I had a situation come up. I was going to the chiropractor. Anyways, that's another story. And I couldn't deal with it with this person, but I said, why don't you come by? I have a meeting I'm going to, but come by at 11:30 and we'll discuss what's happening with you. And it was kind of a crisis. It was going to affect me and something that was going on with me and stuff. And immediately, just as you said, immediately, my fears came up because it was going to affect something that I want to do that was going to be taken care of. But if her crisis was going to be dealt with, I probably wasn't going to be able to do this thing I wanted. And immediately I said, what's your fear? You can't do that. So you haven't done anything for a year. I mean, maybe God has something better. I mean, it was so interesting because I heard this message, just let alone. And I heard this thing that I said, I'd like to have an intuitive thought or an action or something, And I went to the meeting. I did the meeting and everything. And then 11:30, she hadn't come. I called her. She says, oh, I found out my answer. It was removed. It was removed. I didn't have to do anything, nothing. And you know that line that says, God will do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And when I realized I couldn't do anything other than the drill, the discipline, just like you said. If I'm not ready for God, as it says in step 6, and then, humbly ask, and then also say, I don't know. I'm not in a place of neutrality with this. Can you help me? If I hadn't done that, I'd have been exhausted. And I probably would have screwed everything up. I loved your talk. I loved just your, I know a lot of the people you did. And I'm eternally grateful for this, Sam, for this meeting. I tell everybody this is my home Zoom meeting. It's people like you. I mean, we're all around. We've been, doing this for a little bit. But boy, I hear you. There's a lot of people that aren't into their soul. This is a soul sickness they don't realize that there's a presence that's present that will help us. And there's a way out. I mean, this works. It really does, as it says on page 88. But thank you so much. I so appreciate it. I needed to hear you tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. That's a good wind up to the meeting. I give it back to Sam, and thanks everybody. Thanks for
Ron,
inviting.
thank you so much, man. The way that we close this out, because the prayer can get kind of crazy on Zoom with the delay, is that we just kind of go to our inner room and just quietly inside ourselves, we just mute ourselves and quietly inside ourselves say the Lord's Prayer or anything else you'd like. But we encourage the Lord's Prayer. So. Amen. Thanks for a great meeting, everybody. Thank you, Ron. Great job,
Sam.
man. Thanks for it.
Thank you. Thank you.
you.
This is a really good group. I enjoyed this.
Awesome. Thank you.
Guys.
Thank you, Ron. That
Great.
was
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Ron.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ron.
Hope our paths
Sam.
cross
Thank you,
again
Ron.
somewhere.
Yeah, man.
Thank you, Sam.